Hey everyone! Welcome to part 2 of this intro series to patterns. Today, we are talking about how to choose the perfect sewing pattern for your project. In part 1, we talked about how a pattern is a series of 2D shapes that you put together to make a 3D garment, and that the outlines of those shapes are what define the garment. So, what I'm going to walk you through now is how to figure out what your project's shapes and outlines should look like, and how to find a pattern that matches what you want as closely as possible. It sounds kind of complicated, but it's not, I promise. It's super easy. I'll show you. Your very first step is to find a specific source image of the thing that you would like to make and try to pick one that's as big as possible because you're going to print it out. I'm going to use this great costume that George Blagden wore in Versailles as an example. For this next step, you're going to take a fine tip pen like a Sharpie that's going to bleed through the paper, and you're going to draw all around the edges of the garment and the seam lines. And include the lines inside gathers and ruffles because those are part of the garment's shape. And if you need help remembering which lines you've drawn are seam and which are folds, you can do them in a different color. Okay, flip the paper over. This is what's called the line art. This is the pattern of seams and seam lines that you are looking for. If you don't have a printer, you can just do a rough drawing of the outline and the seam lines. It does not have to be accurate or beautiful. You just have to know what the lines mean. I have done this with the worst, laziest drawings in the back of a receipt. Honestly, as long as it helps you remember where the seam lines should be so that you know what to look for, that's all that matters. Next step, we want to find a pattern that matches your line art as closely as possible. In part 1, I went through the different types of patterns that exist and where you can find them. Right now, just because this is what I recommend beginners start with, and because you can walk into any Joann's or Hobby Lobby or Walmart to buy them, I am going to focus on patterns by the big 4 pattern companies, which is Simplicity, McCall's, Butterick, and Vogue. These patterns come in an envelope. The front is printed with a photo or drawings of the finished garments, and the back has a lot of small print and some cartoon line drawings of the garment. The most valuable information that I got from my first mentor was to completely ignore the front of the envelope. Seriously. I mean, this is useless. Those sample garments, they are rarely, if ever, made with the best fabric or techniques. They are slapped together as quickly and as cheaply as possible for the photo shoot, and the person who made the garment is just not necessarily great at it. And this is a Vogue pattern. The envelope will also mislead you into thinking this specific costume is what this pattern is for. This is a Jack Sparrow pattern, but that could not be further from the truth. This art is a marketing example of what you could do, but really you can use these patterns for anything. And the only thing that actually matters is the shape of the pattern pieces, and those are on the back. Look at the line art. That line art is the only thing that matters. You're going to ignore the artsy ad pitch, look at the seam lines. That's what you're buying. Some patterns will only show you the line art at the back of the costume. So reach inside the envelope and pull out the instructions. This is gold. This is what you want. The actual shapes of the pattern pieces are also drawn and labeled here if you need that, and sometimes you will. If you look at patterns online, you'll be able to see the line art, but unfortunately you can't look at the instructions, which is why going to the store in person is best. So what you're going to do is try to find line art on a pattern that matches your Sharpie line art as closely as possible. And once you've found it, that's your pattern. And this line art is practically a perfect match. Do you see why Jack Sparrow on the front is useless? My first costume design mentor actually used this exact Jack Sparrow pattern to make beautifully authentic late 17th century French court costumes for a production of Molière's The Misanthrope. And this pattern is actually a gem. I mean, like, the shirt pattern is really close to an authentic 17th and 18th century man's shirt. And the cut of the coat is surprisingly authentic, especially the dropped shoulder seams that go just diagonally down the back. It is a very good pattern. Next, you need to know which size to buy. The big 4 patterns come with 3 to 4 sizes in one envelope, and depending on the brand, each size's chest, waist, and hip measurements will either be listed on the envelope flap or on the back. So you need to measure your own chest, waist, and hips. Do not go by the listed size numbers. They absolutely will not match the sizes you'll buy in store, especially women. Also, and I talked about this in video 1, but Big Four patterns are not completely size inclusive, so if you need patterns for larger bodies, check out video 1 for specific resources for those patterns. So, that's it. You will probably have a chest measurement that matches one size and a hip measurement that matches another. And this is fine when both measurements fall within the sizes that are available within one envelope. But what do you do when your chest size is in one envelope and your hip size is in another? The standard advice is to buy whichever size fits your largest measurement. And this makes sense, theoretically. It's very easy to take in a garment. It is much more annoying to expand it, especially for beginners. But here's the thing about the Big Four pattern companies. The garments you make with the pattern size recommended for your measurements have a lot of ease. Many pattern envelopes do have at least some finished garment measurements printed on them. But if they don't, or if they don't have the ones that you need, almost all of the Big Four patterns, not all, many of them have the key finished garment measurements for each size printed on the first pattern piece that touches that part of the body. That means the measurements they include are usually chest, waist, hip, and bicep circumferences. And the center front piece is always number 1. If it's a pattern for a coat and pants, the garment for your torso, coat, will have its center front piece as number 1. That's where you look. For pants, it's going to be the front of the pants. So, check this out. For this 18th century caraco jacket, the size 14 body measurement on the envelope says it is for a 36-inch bust. On pattern piece number 1, which is the center front piece of the bodice, it says the final garment measurement is 38.5. That's 2.5 inches of extra space. 2.5 inches. That's how much bigger the finished garment for that pattern size will be. Does this look like she has that much extra space in her bodice? Now, it isn't always bad. For well-fitting suit coats for men, 3 to 4 inches of ease is standard. But for a tight-fitting bodice, it's ridiculous. So, if you fall between pattern envelope sizes on Big Four patterns, this is why it is often sensible to check the finished garment measurements, especially if you want a snug fit on something like this bodice or a superhero suit, because you will probably need to size down, and that means you can just buy the envelope with the smaller sizes. If the finished garment measurements you need are listed at the outside of the envelope, awesome. But honestly, they sometimes aren't. This one, for example, only has bust and back length from base of neck and back length from waist. So if I wanted to know the waist measurement, I'd have to look inside. Honestly, no one has ever yelled at me for unfolding a pattern in the store to check this information. And I have never seen signs that say, please don't do it. So I just make sure to refold everything really carefully and then replace it inside the envelope exactly the way I found it. I figure that as long as you aren't damaging merchandise or creating extra work for employees, I believe you should be entitled to check the product you're buying to make sure it'll fit you. Right? I feel like that's sensible. Now, you have picked your perfect pattern that matches your line art. And you figured out which size you need. Next, you get your fabric. But what kind of fabric and how much? Look at the back of the envelope. The back of the envelope will also tell you what kind of fabric they recommend for each garment, which is just a guideline, but it can be helpful. And it also tells you how much fabric and trim you will need for each size. Fabric and trim are sold by the yard in the US and the UK and by the meter almost everywhere else. And fabric generally also comes in one of 2 widths, 45 inches or like between 54 and 60 inches. If your fabric is wider, you will not need as much length. So some patterns will tell you how much yardage you would need of each width. And some, like this one, just give you the yardage for 1 width, which means you have to do the math if your fabric is wider. But they will always tell you which width they use to calculate the yardage. I always overbuy and get at least an extra half yard of fabric or so, because the second that you only buy exactly as much fabric as you need is always followed by that horrifying moment when your scissors make a terrible mistake, and suddenly the fabric store is completely sold out and will never get any more. I don't know why this happens, but it appears to be a fundamental law of the universe. Overbuying also gives you a buffer if your fabric shrinks, because a lot of fabric does shrink in the wash, or even when it's being ironed. While ironing, I have watched a synthetic taffeta piece shrink up 1/2 inch on every side like it was a puddle of liquid just being sucked up through a straw. It was totally unusable. You have to make the fabric get this shrinkage crap out of its system before you start cutting. So, if your fabric is washable, like cotton, wash it. I always pre-wash and dry my fabric on a setting that is slightly hotter and more violent than I will eventually use with the finished garment, and that ensures that the washes that I will put the finished garment through won't surprise me with unexpected shrinkage. However, washers and dryers are pretty violent on fabric, and if you do not protect the cut edges of your fabric, they will fray like crazy, which can ruin multiple inches of fabric and can sometimes leave you with a giant twisted Gordian knot of loosened threads that have gotten so tightly knotted around your fabric that you will have to invent new swears to deal with trying to undo that mess. So you protect those cut edges by covering them with thread. If you have a serger, just serge the cut edges. A serger is a machine that cuts the raw edge off fabric and it covers the new, neat cut edges with loops of thread. Looks like this. If you do not have a serger, use the widest zigzag setting on your sewing machine, or an overlock setting if your manual says you have one. Most domestic sewing machines do. Then set your stitch length to 5, or the longest one you have, and you're going to stitch or zigzag all down the cut edge. Does not have to be pretty. Its only purpose is to keep your fabric from fraying. If your fabric is dry clean only though, and you cannot wash it, like if it's a beautiful embroidered silk or wool or even a synthetic taffeta, you have to pre-shrink it by pressing. By pressing every inch of your fabric with your iron on the heat setting that is appropriate for your fabric, with a lot of steam. Always test your iron's heat in a tiny bit of fabric first to make sure your iron isn't too hot. An iron should smooth and flatten your fabric. It should never melt or warp or burn it. And if your fabric is delicate, use a press cloth. Pre-shrinking your fabric takes a while, and it sucks when you're really excited to get started right away. But do it. Just trust me, do it. It's not fun to skip this step and cut out all your pieces only to find that they melt like crazy under the iron and now you have no fabric left. I hope this was helpful and gives you enough information to confidently pick out your next sewing pattern. Next time, I'm going to talk you through all the markings on those patterns, so what they mean, why they're important, and how you use them. Happy sewing.